Welcome to the Beau Show. In my continued interview series at Freedom Fest, I spoke with Sean Malone, an executive producer at Return on Ideas, where he creates content in the digital media space to amplify the reach of an idea. He formerly helped build the creative footprint of the Foundation for Economic Education. We had a great conversation about digital media, Hollywood, how his political philosophy developed, creativity, and his hope for future generations. Here's Sean Malone. Sean Malone, thank you so much for joining me here at Freedom Fest in Las Vegas. Sean, first of all, I know that you studied music performance. A little digging on you. So we actually share that experience. I studied vocal performance at Northwestern University, and you were at Nebraska, correct?
That's right, yeah.
And so you've also worked in the creative music sphere in television and film. Tell me a bit about that and how that led you to where you are today.
Yeah, so I've always been, intellectually, I've always been sort of more on this side of things, kind of a classical liberal libertarian. That's always been more intellectually fascinating to me, but from a very early age, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a musician. I was a percussionist originally. A couple years into my undergrad, I actually shifted to be a composition major. And that, and everything actually over a series of years was always sort of a little weird advancement of my own, like maximizing my control over the storytelling of what I was doing. So originally I was doing, performance and then composition, and then I was doing composition for film, and then I was doing film editing and writing, and so every stage along the way sort of led me to become a producer more than anything else, because I found that I hit a cap somewhere where I do the music and they'd say, I don't love the film that I'm working on, so what if I made my own film and then also score it, right? And then that just led down this rabbit hole of learning skills, just learning how to edit, learning how to write, learning how to do motion graphics and camera work and all of that kind of stuff. It's a good 10 years in the development.
Well, yeah, you and I share so much of that because by necessity, same thing.
Yeah.
Music performance led to music composition, that led to writing, that led to where I am today, having my own show, which I envisioned over a decade ago, but it's like some of it's necessity, and some of it's, let me push my skills just a little, one more notch.
Yeah.
So you began also using your creative talent for nonprofits in DC, as I understand.
Yeah, about 10 years ago, 12 years ago now.
And you made some music videos for companies like Reason, correct?
Yeah.
So you were doing that. We also share another cool thing. I mean, we got a lot in common. We're both Telly Award winners.
Oh, yeah.
So you won yours for an best online series. Tell me about that series.
Yeah, so that's a series called How We Thrive, which I did. So I was until very, very recently, about a month and a half ago, I was the creative director for the Foundation for Economic Education when I was brought there to basically build a media production department. And one of the great things about being able to build a department from scratch, especially under the conditions that I was building it at FEE, was that I got to do a ton of experimentation. And so we did a lot of different things. We did, podcasts and various web series and all that kind of stuff. But one of the things that I'm really most proud of is this series that we started on female entrepreneurship, which is a documentary series. And we won, I think in particular, for a film I did called Made in Mecca, which is about Magat Wade, who is actually a main stage speaker here now. She is a Senegalese native who is just a powerhouse entrepreneur, fiery human being, just one of my favorite people in the world, and just a massively well-spoken advocate of free markets in Africa. Just something you don't encounter a whole lot, but as somebody who actually is an entrepreneur in Senegal, she knows firsthand, and who grew up in Senegal, and also sort of had to leave Senegal to experience prosperity before coming back as an entrepreneur. I mean, it's a super powerful story, and it's one of my favorite things I've ever done.
So you went from the Foundation for Economic Education to Return on Ideas. That's where you are now. Tell me about what Return on Ideas is and what you do there.
Yeah, so Return on Ideas is a production. It's a media production and marketing company. And it's very, very small right now. It was started about a year ago by a pair of folks who used to work at the Federalist Society.
Okay.
And they were sort of the in-house creative marketing people there. Decided to take their skills outside and start doing more client work. We still actually work with FedSoc a ton. And so there's a lot of FedSoc's documentaries and explainers and educational videos and stuff. But I was brought on board very recently to essentially take over the production studio and run all of the video production, creative media production, and to really grow it in a very similar way. I hope, anyway, this is my goal, is to build up a pretty powerful, effective team there, doing all kinds of things: documentaries, explainers, narrative shorts, possibly features. Really, one of the things I'm most excited about is that leaving the nonprofit world, where you are often sort of beholden to what the donors are interested in, we're more interested in what we can do profitably, right? So that actually leaves a wider range of opportunities. We're not explicitly driven by one particular mission or reaching one particular group of people. We can do all sorts of things. So I'm honestly very excited about the opportunity to do some feature documentaries pretty soon, to probably do some narrative shorts pretty soon, and then eventually sort of work our way into doing larger scale projects, TV shows, things like that.
Well, it sounds like storytelling is very much your wheelhouse.
Yeah.
And I want to know, from a political perspective, you said you've had this libertarian bent to you for a long time, but tell me about the chronology and the development of that political philosophy and when you kind of knew you felt this way.
Really, really early on. So I was probably 13, 14. This is maybe even outside of this story a little bit, but probably 12, I kind of realized that I was an atheist, which is a kind of a weird thought to have, I think. But I was always really introspective about stuff like that. And so by 13 or 14, 15 years old, I was starting to ask questions about self-ownership, and really about this idea of who gets to decide what other people are allowed to do, what I'm allowed to do, what do I get to decide for you what you're allowed to do. And I pretty quickly came to a fairly strong realization that everybody individually is sort of the best keeper of their own decisions, And once I started thinking that way, it really was kind of a snowball from there, because once you start with a premise of self-ownership, many of the kind of classic liberal ideas sort of flow from that,
Yeah.
The idea of limited government, for example, really comes from this idea that I don't have a right to tell you what to do, and also I don't magically get the right to tell you what to do if I voted on it, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't track.
Right.
So that was really where it came from. And then, of course, I started reading lots of stuff, and I was always a really big fan of history, and I also had a couple formative, there were a few really beneficial people who made an impact. One was a history teacher in high school who was big on American Revolutionary history.
Yeah.
Great influence on me early on. That introduced me to a lot of ideas that I probably wouldn't have necessarily been introduced to. The director of the honors program at the University of Nebraska when I was there was a guy named Patrice Berger. He's retired pretty recently, within the last couple of years, and he was a history professor who specialized in French Revolutionary history. And his classes were also phenomenally valuable, because he got me to read Voltaire and Montesquieu and Bastiat and all of these really incredible critical thinkers, and not just French, right? So we were reading Locke, and all of that stuff made such an impact and made a huge difference. And then, of course, over time, that's just grown and developed, and working in nonprofits for many years, all I'm doing is having these conversations all the time, and I'm rubbing up against economists and political scientists and PhDs who really take a deep dive.
It's interesting where your political philosophy merges with your artistic sensibility.
Yeah.
So I read that you said that anyone that stands in the way of creativity and innovation is a villain. And I'm curious how you see the state of creative expression today, and whether you think Hollywood or leftist culture is standing in its way. Is there a villain out there?
Hollywood's a mixed bag. It's just such a big label for a lot of things, but
I hate to generalize, but...
No, I agree, though. So, like, cancel culture, and we'll say sort of leftist authoritarian culture, I do think is standing in the way of that, and I think you can see that in a lot of different contexts. You can certainly see it in the realm of free speech, but you can also just see it in the realm of the sort of antipathy to business, to entrepreneurship, to people, pursuing profit even. Just the very idea that you might create a business that is successful without immediately having to apologize for it is something that I feel like is really driven by that culture. You know, I mean, it's really driven by this sense that everything is about oppression and everything is about, you know, how we can sort of squeeze that box tighter and tighter and what you're allowed to say and how you're allowed to say it and all of those kinds of things. And I do think that has influenced Hollywood tremendously. And I've talked about, I have a couple series, Out of Frame is a video essay series that is fairly successful on YouTube. I'm actually winding that down right now, but one of the episodes I did recently was about Hollywood's sort of problem with this kind of stuff and where it came from. And I do think you can see a pretty striking rise of those kinds of ideas. Infecting is a pretty polemic word, but I'll use it. Infecting Hollywood.
Yeah.
And I think you really didn't have that 10, 15 years ago. You started to see, Hollywood's always been pretty left and pretty progressive.
Yeah.
But the idea that you would silence people or get people fired from shows or try to have their movies canceled or all of those kinds of things, that's a pretty new phenomenon. You didn't really see these really aggressive campaigns, not only to say, I'm not going to watch this film, I don't think you should watch this film, but to actually try to prevent anyone from being able to see this. That's a different ballgame.